We will go ahead and get started, and then if others join, I'll watch for that, and we'll try to add them. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, tonight, as we think about global missions 2021 and beyond, obviously 2020 was a little bit different. Obviously for the church, but it was a little bit different for the entire world. Um, Typically, the West Virginia Baptist Convention, our churches commission out about anywhere from 300 to 400 individuals on short-term mission trips every single year. And a lot of that came to a halt last March. I remember we had 5 or 6 teams getting ready to go out the weekend after COVID hit West Virginia. And we were kind of scrambling, trying to figure out, what should we do? Is it going to stay a week? Is it going to stay 2 weeks? All of us were wondering. Here we still are in the COVID season. But as we think about what God may be up to, really what I want to do tonight is just really encourage you and motivate you to believe that God is doing something big. God was not caught off guard by COVID. Um, the coronavirus has not stopped God's redemptive, uh, mission from taking place, but rather I'm going to argue that God is doing something special. And so I hopefully find ways to encourage you to join God in what He is doing, especially during this season. And so just to kind of frame things, the place that I want to start is in the book of Acts. And so I'm not going to spend real long here, but I do just want to start here just for a moment, because this has been, for me, something that's been helpful as I think about, as I've thought about, just life and ministry in this season. So Acts chapter 1, verses 1 through 11 says this. It says, in the first book of Theophilus, this is Luke writing, says, I have dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach until the day when he was taken up, after he had given commands through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen. He presented himself alive to them after his suffering by many proofs, appearing to them during 40 days and speaking about the kingdom of God. And while staying with them, he ordered them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father, which he said, you heard from me. For John baptized with water, but you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit not many days from now. Verse 6, so when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? He said to them, it is not for you to know times or seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority. Verse 8, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria to the end of the earth. And when he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven, as he went, behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus, who is taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven. I wanted to start there just to kind of give, like I said, a framework for just the way that at least I have found it helpful to view this particular season of ministry, especially when it comes to missions. And there's just 3 quick observations, 3 quick points that I just want to make coming out of this passage. The first is this. This idea of place was extremely significant. The idea of place was extremely significant. And, look there in verse 4, the question, they're in Jerusalem. And, all of know the importance of Jerusalem, especially to the Jewish people of the early church. And so here they are, they're hanging out in Jerusalem, but even notice their question. Verse 6, Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? So in their mind, as they're wrestling through everything that's going on, they're thinking, okay, this is the time where you're going to restore Israel. And so, place, this idea of place is extremely significant for the early church. And think about, as you read through the Bible, the various places. Uh, you have the Garden of Eden, which is a place. You have Mount Sinai, which is a place. You have all these different places throughout the Bible, and lots of times God commands them to build an altar or erect some sort of monument in that particular location to remember what God had done in that particular place. And so place is extremely significant. And even as you think about COVID, and as you think about just what people were wrestling through as churches shut down and moved online, and just even the grieving process that came along with that. I think part of it for people was the fact that this idea of place is extremely significant as we think about the church, our own local church. That's the place where I was baptized. That's the place where I was discipled. That's the place where I see my friends. That's the place where I was married. The idea of place is extremely significant for us because that's a place where we encountered God. And so the same is true for the early church here in the book of Acts. But a lesson that they were learning here it's not that the place became any less significant, but rather what they learned was that God could work outside of that place. And so as you think about, the command here, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem. Okay, that's what they're familiar with. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. And so you even see from God's command here, Jesus' command here, that Jerusalem will continue to have a place of significance. But I also want you to recognize that my redemptive working is not just focused on just Jerusalem, but it's expanding. It's global. It's outside of the walls of what you're familiar with. You think down further. Acts chapter 2, a popular passage where they devote themselves to the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, breaking bread, and to prayers. But look down at verse 6. It says, day by day, attending the temple together. So that just reminds you that the significant place in their mind, the temple, still had a role to play in the redemptive story. And again, as I think about our own local churches, our local churches are going to continue to have a role to play in the future of ministry. But look what it says after that: day by day, breaking bread, attending the temple together, and breaking bread in their homes. And so that's outside of what they're familiar with. That's outside of the temple. But you're just beginning to see that God is working even beyond the place that they're most familiar. And then lastly, this third point, and this is really the entire book of Acts, and really everything that follows after Acts. But it says the reason for this change was so that those who were not being reached with the gospel could be reached. And so again, think about what the rest of the book of Acts is about. It's about reaching the Gentiles, reaching those who are on the outside, reaching those who weren't being reached already with what they were familiar with. And so as I think about what is going on in this particular season of ministry, this particular season of life, some of me kind of wonders, is the reason that God is allowing this to happen or bringing this about, could it be that God is intentionally using us, drawing us out of the place of our familiarity, to help us reach people that wouldn't otherwise be reached if we stayed within the walls of what we're used to? And so, thinking about this in a missional from a missional standpoint, the place for us in missions, or the traditional way of doing missions, is changing. And again, I think the traditional way of doing missions will, there's always going to be a place for that. However, I think the reason, or at least part of the reason for this change, is so that those who have never heard the gospel may hear. Just to put it into perspective for you. So in the world today, about 7.5 billion people on the planet. And so it's been about 2,000 years since Jesus gave that command to go from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria to the ends of the earth. 7.5 billion people on the planet today. Still about 2.77 billion people have not even yet heard of Christ. That's an extremely large number. Just over 40% of the world has not even yet heard of Christ. Or sometimes people break it down into people groups. So people group is defined as a group of people that have the same culture, they share the same language, they share the same um, demographic, their same geographical location. Roughly a little over 16,000 people groups in the world, and almost 7,000 of them are completely unreached with the gospel. They still have had zero access to the gospel. Again, a little over 40% of the world. And so as I think about that, you know, the way we've done missions for the last 2,000 years has been fairly successful. A lot of people have been reached. However, 40% of the world has still not even yet heard of Christ. And so obviously there's a problem there. And so again, the question I want to ask is could God be doing something with all of this? So that's biblical. Let me just give you just a historical look at this. So you may be familiar with church history, missions history. Lots of times people start with William Carey, the father of modern missions. So in 1792, William Carey went to India. He was a Baptist missionary from England. At the time, missions was not popular. Nobody was doing foreign missions, so this was kind of a strange concept. William Carey read his Bible, read the New Testament, read the Great Commission, felt a burden to go to India. And so 1792 traveled to the coastlands of India. And really that sparked a new missionary enterprise that continued for a number of years as people were focused on reaching the coastlands, reaching, if I can get to the coastlands of India, I can reach India. If I can get to the coastlands of China, I can reach China. If I can get to the coastlands of Japan, I can reach Japan. However, in 1865, along came Hudson Taylor. This is often viewed as the second era of modern missions, where Hudson Taylor was, just beginning to think, okay, we're reaching the coastlands, but that doesn't mean that the gospel is going inland. Just because we're reaching people on the coast does not mean the gospel is going to the people on the main part of the country. And so Hudson Taylor began promoting this idea of inland mission. So he started the China Inland Mission. And so then you begin seeing this shift. We're not just focused on the coastlands, but let's get inland to the cities. So that's what Hudson Taylor began to focus on. And then along in 1934 came a guy, Cameron Townsend. He's the starter of Wycliffe Bible Translators. This idea of people groups became popular, unreached people groups, those who were not reached by the gospel. He began to realize, okay, just because we're reaching the coastlands, just because we're reaching the inlands, doesn't mean that every single people group is being reached. Because just because you reach you plant a church in New York City does not mean that everybody in New York City has the opportunity to hear the gospel, because there's different languages, there's different cultures, there's different even ethnic groups within New York City. And so rather than focusing on just the city, or just the country, we need to focus on each of the various demographics. So that became the focus. And so just doing the math here, just the difference in eras between the coastlands and inlands was about 73 years before the second era began. And then from the second era to the third era was about 69 years. So again, both those roughly 70 years. As we think about that, it's been 87 years since the start of the last era. So I just throw that out there just to pose the question, could God be doing something special with all of this? Opening doors for what could be maybe even a fourth era of reaching people. So really the goal of tonight, and what I want to focus on is I just want to give you 6 trends that we're seeing in missions. And each of these 6 trends were noticeable in 2019. And so all of this was taking place prior to COVID. However, I just want to show you that a lot of these trends really began to accelerate even faster over the course of the last year. So trend number 1, people on the move. People on the move. This gives you a chart. 2019, there were 273 million international migrants. 273 million people that were traveling between countries. And as you think about that, there's various reasons why they're migrating. It could be because of war, it could be because of persecution, it could be because of famine, it could be because of just numerous issues. even looking for better employment or better health care. Just to put that into perspective for you, U.S. population today, 333 million or 331 million. So just think about almost the entire population of the United States um, migrating. That's how many people are migrating just from country to country. And so, think about that. This was 2019. Think about COVID now. A lot of countries, people have lost, yeah, even in our own country, but people have lost jobs. I've spoken to some in other countries. We are starting to get the vaccine. West Virginia is ahead of all the other states in our country and giving out the vaccine. I know several of you have already received, one or both doses of your vaccine. A lot of other countries have zero access to the vaccine and may not ever have access to the vaccine. A lot of war-torn countries. Uh, Prayer requests right now for the country of Myanmar, famously known as Burma, which is in many ways that's where our American Baptist heritage is rooted, is in Adoniram Judson going to the mission field and taking the gospel to Burma. Right now in Myanmar, a place that just recently became a democracy, and Christians were able to practice religious freedom for the first time in many decades. Just last week there was a military coup, and a lot of the Christians have been taken captive and are now in prison. And so again, migration. This causes migration. And so this is a trend that's been going on for a number of years. I anticipate it's going to accelerate as a result of COVID. But let's just think about some of the opportunities that can come from people migrating. First, open doors for the gospel. Where are people migrating from? Where they're migrating from places that are typically hostile, typically a lot of places in the Middle East, North Africa, southern part of Asia, places that are typically hostile to the gospel to begin with, and so it's a hard place for missionaries to get in. But now that they're migrating, think about the number of opportunities that this opens for these people to hear the gospel. As a couple of you were logging in, I was talking with Yvette. Yvette was asking about my role with international ministries and doing some work in the Middle East and North Africa. And one of the organizations that I work with is an organization called Enduring Love that focuses on church planting throughout the Middle East and North Africa. And we've seen this, to be a huge thing with Syrians, as both Syrians and Iraqis who are refugees. They're seeking asylum. They're seeking freedom in the nation of Lebanon, which is a free country where Christianity is legal. And so one thing that we're seeing is that, thousands upon thousands of these Muslim background Syrian refugees are coming to Lebanon. They're hearing the gospel for the first time. They're giving their lives to Christ. And again, if they would have stayed in Syria, none of this would have ever happened. Because I'm certainly not blaming God for the Syrian refugee crisis or for COVID or any of these other things, but I am suggesting that maybe God is using this to open doors for people to hear the gospel that would have otherwise never heard. Not only open doors for the gospel, as they're migrating within other countries, but also opportunities to reach internationals in our own country. I share this picture. So this picture comes from a couple years ago. This is just some of the international students at the University of Charleston. My wife and I lead Baptist Campus Ministry, and every single year we have, of course we couldn't do it this past year, but we have internationals into our home for Thanksgiving. And I think on this particular occasion, we ran out of food real fast. But there were like 30 or 40 nationalities that are represented in this picture. And we were able to share the gospel with them. And again, just the opportunities that we have here in our own country, just from people migrating. And I sat down with a pastor a year or two ago in the Parkersburg area, and just talking about just the opportunities we have to reach internationals. And I remember him saying to me, looking across the table at me during lunch, he said, I don't think we have internationals in our community. And I looked at him and I said, we're sitting in a Mexican restaurant. There are internationals who are serving us right now. But again, just all the migration of people, it's opening doors for people to hear the gospel. And in 2020 has certainly accelerated that. I'm going to keep moving through these trends, and then I'm going to stop at the end to open up for more discussion and questions. Trend number 2, urbanization. So we were already seeing this urbanization, people moving to the cities. This graph just shows what things look like prior to, as well as giving an estimation of what it's going to look like, you know, in 2050. So in 1960, there were 1 billion people living in cities. 2019, there's 4.6 billion people living in cities. And again, as we think about what's going to happen as a result of COVID, I think we're going to see more and more people moving into cities as they look for employment, because again, the rural areas were hit extremely hard, not just in the U.S., but really all over the world. So again, as we think about opportunities, again, more open doors for the gospel. So now no longer do I have to, we'll take New York City, no longer do I have to travel to 50 different cities or 50 different rural communities. But now, since people are moving to the cities, there are opportunities just to go to the city and reach people in that city, that have the opportunity to take the gospel back to those other communities. So again, more open doors for the gospel, as well as I think this also opens more creative ways to do missions. Our traditional way of thinking about missions has always been, you get endorsed, you raise financial support, you go to a city, or you go to another country, and that's where you spend the next 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe the rest of your life, in that particular nation. Well, one of the ways, the Southern Baptists have really capitalized off of this by coining this term of global cities. And so one of the things that they've focused on is they've identified London, Dubai, I think 5 or 6 other cities. I think Mumbai, India is another one that they've specifically targeted, and they begin to cast the vision. Okay, what if we don't just send traditional missionaries, but what if we send business people to get jobs over there? And what if people actually retired to London? And what if college students would take classes in London? And so, looking for other creative platforms besides just our traditional way of doing missions to reach people in cities, recognizing that in many ways, cities shape the world. Cities shape worldviews. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago have a great impact on just the way that people in our country think about things. And so if we can reach those cities, think about how even more we could reach our country. The urbanization. Third trend that we're seeing in missions is co-vocational ministry. So bivocational ministry would be having a side job to support me while I'm in maybe a full-time job to support me while I am doing ministry. Co-vocational ministry is actually viewing your ministry, or viewing your profession, your job, as a teacher, or as an IT person, or as a salesperson, or whatever it is, viewing that as your platform for ministry. And so, this is an actually an interesting trend that we're seeing, not just in missions, I think, but we're also seeing it here in the U.S. A lot of our area ministers, who are working with individuals, trying to place them in churches, who currently have open pastorates, especially when working with young people. A lot of them are hesitant to step into the full-time traditional pastor position, because a lot of them are thinking about, I am a teacher, I am an IT person, I'm kind of interested in maybe pastoring, but using my current platform as a way of doing ministry. So I think this is partly generational. I think it's partly strategic, thinking about, again, using my platform in this traditionally secular arena, and I want to use this to reach people in that particular arena. I think it's also a more holistic view of missions. There was a survey that was done by Barna, that was just released, I think back in October, that looked at some of these trends, particularly this co-vocational thing. This was one where, especially the younger people, Generation Z, millennials, as they look at missionaries, they were looking at it in such a way. A lot of them think that they should have reasons for being in countries. And so, with my work in the Middle East and North Africa, I can't go into the nation of Iraq and say, "Hey guys, I'm here to be a missionary." That's an automatic expulsion or death. But if I'm coming in there saying, I'm a farmer and I want to work alongside you to, to help you grow better crops, to supply food for your your communities and improve your economic status, that's going to earn you favor. And in doing that, um, that's going to give me an end to build relationships and also share the gospel with you. And so again, we're seeing this, especially in a lot of countries, because more countries are becoming a little bit more closed off to the gospel, a little bit more hostile to the gospel. And so we can't necessarily just view things as our traditional race support, go there with a Bible in hand, say, I'm here to be a pastor. It may not work. And so again, this is another trend we're seeing. So as we think about opportunities, this opens doors for business as a way of missions. It's not going to be our traditional raise your support, but I'm going to go there as a business person. I'm going to go there to improve their economy, to improve their livelihood, and in so doing, have the opportunity to build relationships. Again, with Enduring Love, we have several of our so one of the things that we focus on is equipping Arabs to reach Arabs. And we have several church planters throughout the Middle East and North Africa of Arab background. And so as we work with them, they go back to their home country. And so we have several, for example, in the nation of Sudan. And one recently opened a textile industry. And so one of the ways that he does things is he employs 4 people. He employs 2 Christians, 2 Muslims who are typically at great odds together, but they learn to work together. It's going to improve their standing in the community. There's opportunity for them to build relationships and share the gospel and disciple them as well. And so again, this just opens doors for missions in ways that it's really never been opened before. Trend number 4. Again, I recognize that I'm flying through these, but I want to kind of set all these up front before we dive into some more discussion and questions. But technology, this is one that I really don't have to tell you about. You saw the growth in technology. A lot of you have lived through that. This graph just shows, we've come a long way since the printing press. We've come a long way since the telescope. And in many ways, this graph just simply accelerates, and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster. That's how technology grows. It's a quick acceleration. And 2020 certainly accelerated it even further. I was reading one report that suggested that several experts were saying that we've seen 2 or 3 years worth of technological growth in only a matter of months over the past year. And so, it certainly accelerated. Many churches saw this as well, moving to online services. So 2020, 54% growth in streaming services. Again, a lot of your churches, I know we're a part of that. Prior to COVID, 15% of churches in America had some sort of online presence. After COVID, or not after COVID, but where we are today, over 90% of churches in America has some form of online presence. And so again, just tremendous growth. 43% of the world are spending more time on social media. 42% of the world are spending more time on messenger services, such as Facebook Messenger and other messenger services. Look at this statistic. Over 4.66 billion people are active internet users. 4.66 billion people are active internet users, 59% of the world population. And so again, as we think about just that statistic earlier, just that map of the unreached, there are more people who are online than there are people who are currently being reached with the gospel. And so as we think about just the opportunities, if these people are online and they're getting access to information that they've never had before, how can we engage them for the sake of the gospel? One opportunity I think that this is opening up, and this is one that I've really been pushing, especially with international ministries, is this idea of digital mission trips. And so, if a lot of our cities, such as Beirut, Lebanon, I've spoken with some of our missionaries there, if they're doing ESL, English as a second language training online, and if they're doing counseling online, and if they're doing discipleship online, is there a way that we could come alongside them online and help help disciple and get involved in counseling and get involved in ESL training. I realize, there's time differences that we have to think about, but is there a way that we can come, utilize some of the technology that we now have and do digital mission trips? Now, I do believe that missions is incarnational, where we come alongside and um, you know get to know the culture, and we're going to better serve people in that culture if we understand the culture. However, there's a lot of individuals who may not be willing to get on a plane because of fear, or may not be willing to raise, they're scared about raising support, or maybe I can't take a week or two off of work to go on a mission trip. However, what if we could do digital mission trips as kind of an entryway or a pathway into mission trips? If I am counseling somebody, counseling, say, a Syrian refugee, and just working them through this, or doing telemedicine, and beginning to cultivate a heart for these people, could that lead down the road to some form of, okay, now that I have a heart for this person, now I'm actually interested in maybe going overseas and experiencing, what this is like. And so again, maybe this is opening some more doors. I think this is also another opportunity, emerging role for young adults. For many churches that set up online services and began streaming their church services online, um, who did you lean to? Lots of times it was young adults who already live in this world. They're already used to social media. They're already used to streaming. They're already used to YouTube. And so a lot of churches I know around our state really relied upon young adults who really stepped their game up to help churches, um, develop an online presence. And so again, as we think about, just this growth in technology, could it be that God's using this to create, an even bigger role for young adults? Another statistic that I saw, 50% of the world's population, this is an interesting statistic, 50%, over 50% of the world's population is age 30 or younger. But think about that, over 50% of the world's population is 30 or younger. And so as we think about, reaching those individuals, who do you think is most equipped to reach those individuals? Probably the 30 and under. And that's not to rule the rest of us out, but the 30 and under already live in that world. They already understand the technology. They already understand the social media. They already have some common bonds there. And so again, just some opportunities that can come from this. Fifth trend, and this kind of goes along with the one that we just talked about, with over 50% of the world being 30 and under, but we're seeing a growth in skepticism. So some of this is generational. Um, some of this is technological, and I think some of this is also political. Starting with the last one there, political. I think coming out of this most recent election, and we've seen this in more and more elections, the more and more access we have to all these, different views and opinions and all this kind of stuff. I think people are becoming less trusting in the typical, political system that we have in our country, not just in our country, but worldwide, and we're seeing that. You see that by the riots. You see that by the ongoing conversation. Was the vote rigged? All this kind of stuff. But people are becoming increasingly skeptical of the political system. So I think that that factors into it. Also technological. We have access to information like we've never had at any point in human history. And so I was reading something recently. You go back 20, 30 years, and prior to that, as we think about worldview, a worldview is the way that I interpret the world, or just the way that or the lens through which I view and understand the world. You go back 20, 30 years, and how, what was the primary influence on someone's worldview? It was their parents. Their parents pretty much governed their understanding of things. And where was the parents, at least here in America, where was the parents' worldview shaped? Well, lots of times it was shaped by the church, and so the church had a huge influence on society. Well, now you move into today's age, and parents are having less and less influence on the worldviews of their children, because now you have school, you have Netflix, you have Disney, you have outside culture, you have social media. I mean, you have so many other influences on someone's worldview, that the parents are losing influence. The church is certainly losing influence, and so the younger generation is becoming increasingly skeptical, not only of the political system and of everything else, but also of the church and just of religion in general. So, what opportunities do we have from this? This is where I would really like to emphasize discipleship. Um, start with global discipleship. These are trends we're not just seeing here in the United States, but we're seeing worldwide. So you take we'll stick with the Middle East. Take a country such as Saudi Arabia, where it's 99% Muslim. That's the culture. That go back 20, 30 years, that's the only thing that those individuals are ever going to hear about. But now with increase in technology and social media and all these other tools, they are becoming increasingly skeptical. They are becoming increasingly, they're searching. And so now there's opportunities to really disciple people in ways that like never before, because there's an openness to people like never before. And so there's an opportunity to reach people. But then also with our own local church discipleship. I mean, the reality is with our young people, if we don't invest in them, if we do not disciple them, they're not going to stick around. They're going to go find their own form of truth somewhere. They are skeptical, but they're also sponges, and they value relationships. They value wisdom. They value truth. And so, just from a local church perspective, the opportunity we have, if we invest well into our young people, the opportunity to reach people is just going to grow exponentially. And so, again, just the opportunity we have, this skepticism, they're asking questions that previous generations didn't ask, but that allows them to go much deeper in their own discipleship and relationship with Christ. And then lastly, this last trend, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, is just the trend of poverty and despair. And so we've been seeing this for decades. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. You look at the caste system in India. You look at other systems in place. You look at the system here in America. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. I mean, this is pretty much a global thing. And COVID certainly is going to increase this, where the poor countries and other parts of the world, COVID has I mean, destroyed their economy, and so they're going to get poorer, and there's going to be an increase in despair. So the opportunity that comes from this, as you think about just their own longing for hope, in many ways, this presents the perfect backdrop, I think, for the light of the gospel to shine brightest. As you think about hospitals, the hospitals were formed in many ways by Christians, by Christian missionaries. As you think about schools, in many ways they were formed by Christian missionaries. And so a lot of these institutions that we have in place were formed in the past by Christian missions. And so now, as we think about just the brokenness, the poverty, the despair that people are experiencing, again, what a perfect backdrop for the light of the gospel to shine brightest. Now is the time to really consider missions. And so as we think about missions in 2021 and beyond, this is the main thing that I want to emphasize, is that we must prioritize missions. We must prioritize missions. I think now, like never before, God is opening doors that have never been opened before. I was listening to something recently. Matthew chapter 24 is talked about a lot. I'm not going to read through all of this, but as we talk about COVID, there's been a lot of conversation. Is this the end times? We're seeing, you hear wars, rumors of wars. Things are getting worse. Going on over here. Tribulation, all these other things. Things are getting worse. But what I want you to know when it comes to the end times, look at verse 14. This is the final thing that's listed. Anytime that you watch these televangelists who talk about end times on TV, they always leave this verse out. Verse 14. This is the final thing listed. It says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." And so for me, as I go back to one of those first slides and I see, 40% of the world has not yet even heard of the gospel. 6,500 people groups have not yet even heard the gospel. It's obvious that we're getting closer to the end times, but Jesus isn't coming back yet. I think that there's still a huge mission to accomplish. And again, if you want Jesus, if you're tired of COVID, if you're tired of racial tension, if you're tired of poverty, let's accelerate things and reach more people, reach the nations with the gospel, and bring Jesus back sooner. But I was listening to something recently, someone from Wycliffe Bible Translators, and they had just gotten back from a translation conference and working with translators all over the world. And this is their prediction. They said within 13 years, they could have the gospel they could have the Bible translated into every language on the planet. Think about that for a second. Within 13 years, they could have the Bible translated to every language on the planet. That's the rate at which they're going right now. So if we think about that, if that rings true, looking back at verse 14, if that's the final tipping point, to bring Jesus back, I guess the question I would pose to you to think through as an individual and as a church, what if you had 13 years left? If that statistic is true, and if that's the final trigger, what if you had 13 years left? Now, how would you prioritize things? Would you want to participate in that bringing about of the gospel to the ends of the earth? This is what I want to close on. So what now? This is a bunch of information, but how do we actually apply this? I just want to give you five basic things. Number one, pray. Matthew 9:37 and 38 says, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask or pray that God would raise up more laborers to go into the harvest field." And so I interpret that verse, prayer has a direct impact on the raising up of laborers to reach people around the world. And so first and foremost, and this is primary, it's not a secondary thing, but pray that God would raise up laborers, pray that God would raise up laborers from our churches, pray that God would use 2020 and 2021 to open more doors for more people to hear the gospel. Second, give. Going and missions only can take place because of giving. This is something I really want to celebrate, as a convention family, because, my role with the convention, I'm Minister of Missions and Finance. I always tell people missions first, but from the financial perspective, I mean, it was so encouraging to watch our churches continue to give to our missionaries throughout the pandemic. I've worked with some of the other regions across our national denomination, especially when it comes to international ministries, and a lot of regions, a lot of churches saw a drastic decrease in giving. A lot of missionaries saw a decrease in giving. A lot of missionaries are coming off the field to re-raise support. For us, all of our missionaries saw an increase in giving during 2021 or during 2020 and into the beginning of 2021. And so I just want to say thank you for just the ways that you have continued to give. But I would say, continue. I would just want to encourage you to continue prioritizing giving, so that more and more people can be reached with the gospel. Thirdly, go. If I tell people, if you put your finger up here and if you can feel a pulse, that means you're still alive. Then that means you are qualified to go, serve in God's redemptive working among the nations. This is, I'm not going to take time, but I'm reading through the Bible right now. I'm into Leviticus right now, and I've been underlining in my Bible all the different places where God is promising the restoration and redemption of the nations. And I would argue that that's one of, if not the singular theme of the Bible, because we see it, the culmination of it in the book of Revelation. But if you want to join with what God is doing, God's redemptive working, then go. maybe as a traditional missionary, if you want to go as a traditional missionary, I would love to talk with you about it. But if you're close to retirement, consider retiring in a place outside of your comfort zone, and in a place where people aren't being reached with the gospel, such as London, such as Dubai, such as some of these other locations. Or if you're a student, or if you have high school age kids, or if you work with youth, let's explore this together of what would it be look like, or what would it look like to study in a country where you can reach people with the gospel. Or if you're a business person, consider opening a business in a place where people aren't being reached with the gospel. Just think about some of the opportunities there, or even digitally. We talked a little bit about that. I would love to explore that with you. What would it look like to give several mornings a week, or a couple mornings a month, to disciple someone, or to counsel somebody, or to teach someone in another country. Not only going, but welcoming. Again, recognizing just the great migration of people, the number of international peoples that are here in our own backyard. Just around me. So I live in Kanawha City, in Charleston. I have a neighbor back here who's from Egypt. I have a neighbor over here who is from Syria. Just here in West Virginia, I have the nations coming to me, and they're also coming to you. They're at the universities, they're at the hospitals, they're at your place of employment, and so look for ways to welcome those people, and to minister to them. And the last thing I just want to leave you with is just mobilize. And that's simply just encouraging people, challenging people to join God in what He's doing among the nations. I've already hit on the fact that 50% of the world population is under the age of 30. So I would say, if that's in mind, particularly look to mobilize young people, mobilize the college students, mobilize the youth, mobilize even children. Just begin developing a heart for what God is doing among the nations, and those young children. And let's mobilize people to join with what God's doing, and make sure that it is within 13 years that Jesus comes back. I would love for that, and I'm sure many of you would as well. But that's a lot of talking on my, from my perspective. I want to stop right here. It's probably a lot to think about, but open it up to you. What additional thoughts, comments, questions, insights do you have that you may want to discuss? Hopefully I didn't put anyone to sleep.
Todd, you were talking about the possibility of more digital mission trips. Would that be pretty much what we were doing as the convention last year, or is this going to be something different?
Um, there's more and more opportunities that are opening up. So I got an email today that they are going to be doing that. International Ministries, for example, is hosting I think a 1 week mission trip, digital mission trip. So it's a couple hours a day, I think typically in the mornings, to Eastern Europe. And so you would meet some of our partners in Eastern Europe, and just hear some of the ways that God is at work in those particular countries, and just beginning to build relationships in such a way that maybe you could follow up and do some more stuff with them. So there's some people, there's a girl from Cincinnati who just recently finished doing some ESL training, or teaching some young girls in Hungary the English language. And so she would spend 2 or 3 hours a day. She was a college student, 2 or 3 hours a day, teaching, I think, for about 6 weeks, doing ESL training in Hungary. We have others. We have seminaries right now who are requesting professors, and recognizing that this is an opportunity. Now that everyone's used to being online, your professor pool grows significantly, because now no longer do we have to pay you to travel, or you have to be willing to travel, but from your own kitchen table, you can be instructing students halfway around the world. And so there's those opportunities. I've talked with Sarah Chetty quite a bit in Lebanon about doing some counseling for refugees. We've been talking about telemedicine. So in many ways, this is still being explored. can't necessarily give you a definite say, next week that you can do this. But I would say if there's a passion that you have, or a particular area of the country that you want to, or particular area of the world that you want to explore, I would say that there's certainly a need. And one thing that we have found in just some of our initial discussions is that this would probably focus more on cities. Again, as we talked about urbanization, the cities have technology, they have the internet. I've spoken with Keith and Debbie Myers and a little bit with the Aragons about the same topic. They're working in rural communities that don't have access to the internet. And so the idea of doing a digital mission trip in an urban setting, probably, or in a more rural setting, probably isn't possible. However, there are missionaries in more urban settings who are very much open to the idea.
I have started doing more with missions and outreach in our church, as far as mission presentations, speakers. For example, the Reeds are here in the United States before they go back in the summertime. So we're going to have them speak to us for an hour, and just hear about what they do in detail and so forth. But then have more opportunities here in town. Also, anybody else that has been on a missions trip, get them to speak online, because our church people not going to church feel isolated. And so I, in a way, feel obligated to give them something wholesome to watch and to hear. And I just finished doing a presentation on Haiti. I had gone there for 2 trips. And so I got to talk about those 2 trips. Well, it's been quite a while since I've been to Haiti, but I have kept up with everything that's going on in the region that I had worked in. So I knew how to update all that information. And they just loved it. They loved hearing about new countries and that they're not familiar with. So just giving them the opportunity to hear is wonderful, and being able to do this by Zoom or any other media has been helpful to, even if you did it once or twice a month, that's once or twice that maybe that evening they didn't have to sit at home alone or it be too quiet.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And if you were to speak to any missionary, when was it that God called you to the mission field? Every single one of them will point to a time that they heard a missionary give a presentation, or a time that they heard someone speak on the topic of missions, or even a time that they went on a short-term mission trip themselves. And so definitely do not undervalue, the role that can play in calling people to the mission field, because for everybody it starts there. I had a seminary professor that he said he couldn't prove this. He didn't have enough data, but this was his theory, and I would agree with his theory that often for those that go to the mission field, your first exposure to missions has a significant impact on your long-term calling to missions. So for myself, my first short-term mission trip was to the Middle East, which is where I continue to do ministry. A lot of my own focus and attention is on the Middle East. That's just where God has really developed a passion for me. Others, their first trip was to Haiti, and guess where they're still passionate about? They're still passionate about Haiti. And so, that first experience has a huge impact. And so I would, Becky, that's a great point. I would really encourage churches to take advantage of this time, because even a lot of our missionaries, typically the traditional way was, you go overseas for 4 years, you come back on your home assignment, and that's when you update all your churches. Well, now that everybody's used to Zoom, I can update you halfway around the world whenever I want. And so again, just some great opportunities that we can definitely make use of. That's a great point.
Todd.
Yes.
So I recently have taken over missions at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Parkersburg. And so maybe this is probably a answer you all know, but to contact those missionaries or to get, is there some central place where their schedules are kept? Whether they come and we do a fundraising lunch in person or we schedule a Zoom something.
Yeah, every missionary is a little bit different. Probably the easiest way is just even contact our office, or you can contact me.
Okay.
You know, lots of times, like for the Reeds, they manage their own schedule. But just to make it easy, lots of times people just contact me, and I'll just forward your email onto them, and you know, you can arrange things from there.
Okay.
So other missionaries prefer that we help them with their schedule. It just varies, but probably a central location would just be to contact our office, and
Okay.
we can definitely assist you with that.
Thank
Because we found some people respond better to email, some through Facebook, some through phone calls, WhatsApp. You know, just everyone's a little bit different. So.
Okay.
Hi, Todd. So there are some opportunities locally. So recently our church has also been involved with a recovery center. So Harmony Ridge is an addiction recovery center.
Okay.
And we started providing a Bible study for them. And those folks are, it's a Christian-based recovery center. And so there's, you know, they're part of that recovery process is admitting, you know, I don't have control and I need a higher power, and that higher power is God. And those folks are very hungry to hear the gospel. And so I think, so there's a need out there in our communities, especially in West Virginia, because the opioid addiction crisis has really hit West Virginia very hard. And so there are a lot of these recovery centers around the state. And so as our churches could reach out to those different recovery centers, I think there's a pretty big mission field, you know, right here in our own backyard that we could reach out to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes along with the Acts 1:8, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so, yeah, we absolutely have a Jerusalem to reach as well.
I think reaching out to the missionaries to speak to your church or your group would help boost them at this time because of the despair that they have have happened to them money wise, and maybe they've been pushed out of the country.
Yeah.
To lift their spirits even by asking them. I think a lot of times makes people stronger.
Absolutely. That's another fantastic point. Because if you think about, I'm just going to take the example of the pastor. I know we have a couple pastors here with us, but you know, take the pastoral position, and now with all the restrictions put in place, I can't go visit people in hospitals. I can't even go visit people. And I can't do this. And so a lot of pastors have really struggled early on too, and they continue to struggle. It's just like, what do I do with my time? And, you know, almost kind of trying to find a way to reinvent myself. So I get behind a computer screen and talk to a computer screen. But, you know, you didn't sign up to be a pastor because you like looking at a computer screen. You love relationships. And so, you know, just think about the ways that the pastors have struggled, or teachers, or, I mean, every single profession. Now let's take that to a mission field where you're in a context where there's not really too many other English speakers around you. You can't go out into the community. You're still receiving financial support. And so you almost feel guilty, like I need to somehow earn the support that I'm getting, and I'm not even doing anything because I'm hunkered down in my house just like everyone else is, because that's the restrictions, and I can't even, especially in the rural communities. And I can speak to Keith and Debbie Myers. They were doing some short devotions on basically it wasn't a cassette tape, but it was I think a jump drive, and they were mailing it out to churches in rural communities, completely unsure. I don't know if people are getting it. I don't know if the mail's delivering it. We're not getting any responses. but we're going to keep doing it, just thinking maybe it'll strike a chord with somebody. And so yeah, a lot of them are feeling that discouragement. And so that's a fantastic point again, Becky. Just it is a great time to reach out and encourage them during this time, because a lot of them are struggling, trying to figure out what to do, just like you are, but I think it's even amplified in another context. Any other comments or questions? We just passed the 8:30 mark. Well, if I could leave you with I guess just this one truth, what I hope you leave here with, I hope you leave here with at least some resources to go back and think about ways that you can mobilize your church. But even more so, I want to leave you with a confidence that God did not hit the pause button. God's not up there, twiddling his thumbs, similar to the way I just described our missionaries, sending out little messages, hoping it somebody gets it. I think God is doing something big, and I believe that from a scriptural standpoint. I believe it from a historical standpoint, and I believe it from just a trends standpoint of what we're seeing. And so, I just want to challenge you, encourage you to mobilize your church, especially 2021 and beyond. Let's prioritize missions. Let's join God in what he's doing, because I think God is continuing to do some big things, and he's opening some doors for us. And so let's go through it. There's always going to be the traditional place of traditional missions, but I think God's opening some new doors. And so, how can we as a state convention, how can we as churches, as followers of Christ, how can we navigate through this? And so again, I just want to be attentive. And so, looking at many of your faces, you guys are the leaders within our state when it comes to missions. And so thank you. Thank you for the ways that you have mobilized people over the last decades, and just the legacy that you have already left. And so again, I'm excited to see just even how this next generation of people step up. But even as the next generation steps up, I think each of you still have a role to play. And so just be attentive to whatever God wants to do in and through you, and as well as in and through your church. And any way that I can be a resource, that's what I'm here for. That's what I enjoy. Several of you were just in the online giving workshop that I was just a part of. That falls under my finance role. I love helping with that, but I much prefer to help people when it comes to missions. And so any way that we can partner together, I certainly want to do that.
Todd, could you
Yes.
send your PowerPoint presentation out to us, please?
Yep, I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. We are recording all of these workshops. I was going to give you a warning not to say anything mean about your pastor or anybody else, but too late, but nobody said anything. But if you do want a recording of this, or even if you want to share this workshop or any of the other workshops, we'll have them ready by next week. And so we'll send all that out, as well as the PowerPoint of this, and be happy to do that.
Thank you, Todd.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, let me close us in prayer. Father, I thank you for each person that's here. I thank you for each church that's represented here. God, I thank you for the ways that each person, each church has already been involved in your redemptive work in our own Jerusalem, in Parkersburg and Charleston, and just around our state, in our Judea and Samaria, and even to the ends of the earth. I thank you for the ways in which you've used our churches and used our state convention to make disciples around the globe. And God, right now, we're in a strange season where changes are taking place, but we believe that you are in control, you're sovereign, and you're good, and you are working all things together, even for our good. And so, God, I pray that you would help us to recognize where you are at work and to join you in that process. And so, God, I do pray that you would stir our hearts to pray more fervently, that you would draw our hearts to give more graciously. God, I pray that you would mobilize us to go more creatively, and to welcome people with arms wide open, And Father, I pray that you would use us to mobilize an army of believers to join you and what you're doing around our state and around the world. God, we want to see your name worshiped. We want to see your name magnified, and we want to be part of your redemptive story. And so, God, I lift this up to you, and I pray this in your Son's most precious name. Amen. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining. And like I said, we'll be sending out this resource next week. In any way I can help, let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Todd.
Have a good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.